My little brother was drowning. I went in after him and almost didn't come back. A neighbor pulled us both out. That night, my mother said the line that has lived in my head ever since. Our town called it Lake Warren on the map because lake fits better on a brochure. It was a pond, oval, shallow near the edges, cattails in clumps, one sagging picnic table, a chain link fence that did a better job keeping sentimentality in than kids out. On weekends, people fished for sunfish and pretended they tasted like anything. On weekdays, it was a quiet place to be irresponsible. I was 15. My brother, Eli, was 9. I knew enough to be in charge, but not enough to understand how heavy that job would be. We'd biked there after lunch because summer felt like a hallway and we were sprinting down it toward nothing. He skipped rocks that didn't skip. I tried to teach him the wrist flick and the rock choice ritual, flat, round, no cracks. He got bored, said he was hot, kicked off his shoes, stepped under the slick shelf where mucky sand becomes water. There's a thing ponds do that pools don't. The bottom changes its mind. 2 steps are firm, the third is silk and surprise. I saw him slide, calf deep, then thigh, then his knees went elastic, and he did that child move where arms helicopter because no one taught him yet that arms don't keep you up, lungs do. I told him to come back. It was a sentence that assumed water takes orders. He pushed off the bottom, reached for a clump of broken reeds, and they broke like promises. Movies taught me drowning is loud. Real drowning is administration. It's the body filing a sequence of forms without consulting the brain. He didn't wave, he didn't shout my name, his mouth opened the way people open their mouths when they're about to argue, and the pond wrote its answer down his throat. I stepped in because that is the only verb the moment allows. The first shock was not temperature but texture. The bottom was pudding, the water was green and close around the ears. I kept eye contact with him and said something calm I don't remember. I'm grateful the brain records tone even when it deletes the words. He grabbed my forearm. Relief arrived and then left in the same second. If you've never had someone drowned against you, it is a hug from panic. It turns you into furniture. I remembered from a poster at the Y that you approach a drowning person from behind and keep their mouth above water with your forearm under their chin. That's a great plan for lifeguards in red shorts. I was in shorts that still smelled like grass in the knees. He latched to me chest to chest and climbed me like a ladder to air that kept moving away. We went under. The sound changed from summer to machinery. I tasted algae. I pushed up, got his face into air again, tried to slide behind him. He clamped again. We went under again. Both times took about a lifetime and half a second. There is a point where the body decides. The vision comes in like a tunnel, whose wands are not just dark, they are busy. I remember thinking oddly that I had never been so aware of my own shoulders. They felt like doors I could push through or fold under. Something hit my ribcage from the side, an arm, a grip, the shape of help. Mr. Kellen, the neighbor from 2 doors down, a man with permanent mower stripes on his forearms and the kind of calves you get from walking every evening. He had been on the path. He had heard the wrong silence. He knew enough to make his body a tool. He took Eli from me in one practiced, ugly movement that put my brother's mouth where air lived and mine in the water again. Then he grabbed the back of my shirt and hauled until the bottom returned as mud, and then as sand, and then as the rude texture of shore. I coughed until the coughs ran out. Eli vomited pond and air and tears. Kellen's face was somewhere between anger and assessment, the expression of a man who has very specific standards about Tuesday afternoons. He didn't say much. He gave Eli to gravity and me to a pair of instructions: breathe and stay. He checked pupils with a thumb, counted breaths, kept his own pulse slow because ours were not. He had done this before, not here, but at some point in his life when being a person required this exact knowledge. Sirens arrived late because the world is big and competence is a small village. The EMTs decided the hospital didn't need us. We wanted it anyway. Kellen walked us to his car and drove us home because our bikes still leaned against the fence where summer had left them. My mother was in the kitchen working a knife through a watermelon the size of a bowling ball.
She grew up in a house where emotions were a private sport, and she practiced ours into smaller uniforms. She saw our clothes and our faces and the neighbors and the not hospital. The knife kept moving. She asked what happened in a voice for customer service. I told it with hiccup gaps. Eli said nothing, which was his specialty. Kellen added the adult phrases like caught hold and went under. The story made its way across the island and into her assessment. She looked at us and then at him like an inspector, and her mouth produced the line my life would build rooms around. He should have left you in that pond. No scream, no flung object, no theatrics, just a cold administrative conclusion delivered to a neighbor as if she were giving him feedback about hedges. My brother was next to me on a towel, hair like pond grass, chest still remembering the depth. I was there, a person, and she was speaking across me like I was a bucket that had failed at holding. I could build a museum around that second. The exact diagonal of sunlight on the tile, the angle of the knife, the one watermelon seed that landed by the sugar jar, the way Kellen's eyes did the math of whether he had heard correctly and then decided he had. The brain takes photos only at the strangest weddings. He said nothing. He placed his hand on Eli's head with the gentleness you reserve for cats and old books, squeezed my shoulder, and left. The door made the sound our front door makes when it has decided not to close again unless you tell it you mean it. I stood there, wet and 15, learning that a sentence can be an instrument. People always ask where my father was. He was at work, which is truthful and useless. He arrived in the evening and found the scene rearranged into normal. Dry clothes, cut mullen, quiet. I told him later. He said he would talk to her. Whatever talk happened lived behind their door. My life did not notice a change. I stopped speaking to her that day, not with a dramatic oath, but with the slow efficiency of a machine being unplugged. We did logistics. We marked the calendar for orthodontist and school and the ways families move. We did not offer each other opinion or soft syllables. Silence is not always cold. Sometimes it is a clean room.
The pond incident lasted about half a minute. My body lived there for years. Not in nightmares, those have plots. In micro-flinches, the way I watched bodies at pools, the way I cataloged exits, the way my back muscles prepared for grabs that never came. I avoided water for a season, then returned with a hard, practical curiosity. It is easier to respect something than to fear it if you can understand the instructions. I took lifeguard classes because I didn't like how little I'd known. Textbook drowning signs are not the flailing arms we grew up with. They are quiet, vertical, eyes glassy, mouth at the surface and then under. Repeat. People cannot call for help and breathe at the same time. Children sink faster in murky water because panic makes them heavy. The approach from behind move is not just a technique, it is a survival strategy for both people. Talk, always, even if you think they cannot hear, because your words are a rope. The first aid part was method. Scan, tap, shout, breathe, compress. The humility part was more important. You are not the hero if you act alone and panicked. You are a hero if you make the right sequence possible. I learned the throw, don't go rule for people who aren't trained. Reach with a pole. Toss a float. Never let panic turn you into a second victim. I replayed the pond and realized I had become the rules example. I didn't waste time on shame. I put it in a box called Things Teenagers Do Because Life Asked Them a Graduate-Level Question. I kept the certification for 3 summers and then kept the knowledge long after the card expired. Once, at a beach with rips, I saw the pattern out past the sandbar, the darker stripe, the stream of foam heading out to sea. I walked 20 yards left with a stranger's kid who had been about to learn the riptide lesson the mean way. The parents thanked me with the intensity reserved for strangers who keep your life intact. I shrugged, because shrugging kept my own systems from going theatrical. My mother and I practiced a fluency in logistics. We handled the world's practicalities like old co-workers who never liked each other. Holidays had chairs with names on the backs. Mine was next to the aunt who loved boring people into safety.
I graduated without the usual kitchen speech. College gave me distance that didn't fix anything, but made the silence breathable. People asked if I'd confront her, demand an apology, pull the sentence out like a thorn. I tried twice. Once at 19, drunk on righteous freshman energy. Once at 26, sober but still believing in the magic of conversations that change people. The results were variations on misunderstanding. She insisted she hadn't meant it, then insisted I misheard, then insisted it was just a way of speaking, then argued that mothers say things they don't mean under stress, then suggested that teenagers should have better judgment than to take things personally. If you've ever tried to get someone to acknowledge a sentence they built to survive their own life, you know the math. They cannot afford your version because it taxes their entire foundation. You can spend years in collections, or you can write it off and build credit elsewhere. So I built credit elsewhere. I learned to be the adult I would have wanted in that kitchen. I learned to say that sentence was not okay without making the roof collapse. I learned to tell myself the story without adding adjectives. A neighbor rescued us. A mother split herself from her child to protect the child she understood better, and I became the floor under that decision. This description is generous. Generosity is cheaper than rage over the long term. I kept in touch with my brother. Eli grew into a person whose shoulders remembered something from that day if his mouth didn't. He avoided deep water and conflict with equal skill. We didn't talk about the pond much. We didn't need to. It lived under what we did talk about. Jobs, girlfriends, the way our town made everyone good at pretending.
When I was 30, I saw Mr. Kellen at a hardware store, the aisle with the strange screws. He looked the same, just a little more gray and a little more permission to be slow. We made the pleasantries people make. I thanked him again, not the kid thank you, the adult one that acknowledges the bill that keeps not arriving. He told me something I did not expect, that my mother's sentence had not surprised him, not because he thought she was cruel, but because he grew up with a mother who used language like a snap trap. Some people, he said, without looking at me, slice fear into shapes that look like you. It keeps them from looking at themselves. He'd heard versions of that sentence all his life. He had decided at 22 never to say anything in heat that would require someone to build a house around it. It didn't excuse her. It explained the infrastructure. He also confessed that he'd almost followed the rule, throw, don't go, but his body had already made the decision. He hated that about himself a little, the way certain men step into water even when the book says don't. I told him the book owes its chapters to people like him. We stood there in an aisle smelling like fertilizer and found a kind of peace. I didn't speak to my mother for years. The silence was not punishment, it was preservation. When we eventually touched the same room again, it was because Eli called from a hospital hallway. She'd had a fall. It wasn't theatrical. It was the kind of fall people have when they keep their worlds small for too long. I flew home and did what competent strangers are supposed to do. Signed forms, listened to nurses, asked about medication lists, learned the names of day shift and night shift stars. She was smaller, but her voice was the same weather. Controlled clouds, no rain. I didn't expect an apology. I expected nothing, which is a very calm expectation. We sat in a room with the door open and a TV watching itself. The pond did not enter the conversation. I told her about work. She told me about the neighbor's new fence. She asked about Eli as if he weren't the one who brought me. It felt like two archivists treating labels without touching the boxes. On the second afternoon, she lended a sentence that was so close to what I had needed that it almost worked. "You always were dramatic," she said, which in her dialect means I'm afraid of the volume inside me and I resent you for not translating it better. I kept my hands still and my voice even, and said the thing I had rehearsed for half my adult life. "The sentence you said after the pond was not acceptable.
I will never pretend it was. Her mouth tightened the way a drawstring bag does. She changed the subject to hospital food. That was our closure. Forgiveness for me is not a ceremony. It is a boundary that doesn't leak. I forgave her in the sense that I stopped expecting her to give me anything she didn't have. I forgave myself for needing it anyway. I did not give her access to the parts of me that would bruise under that weather. This arrangement is boring and effective. I keep a short list that lives on paper near my desk. It is not inspirational, it is operational. Water rules. Throw, don't go. Talk constantly. Approach from behind. A drowning person isn't yelling. Lungs first, pride later. Call for help sooner than your ego wants. Family rules. Sentences can be weapons. You are allowed to remove yourself from the room. You can love someone's history without living inside it. Apology and access are separate currencies. Self-rules. Keep your body strong enough to haul. Keep your voice calm enough to lead. Read the signs, tides, faces, contracts. Never make a teenager answer a graduate question without a manual. I teach friends' kids to swim when asked. I am not evangelical about water. I am evangelical about the simplicity of breathing. I volunteer at a community pool once a week during the summer as the boring adult who reminds people that puddles kill too. When a mother corrects a kid by calling them names, I feel my back rise like a cat. I do not correct the mother. I show the kid how to float, and I make sure they hear an adult say, "You're learning," because some sentences are life jackets. Eli and I go back to Lake Warren once a year and stand by the fence. The town finally put up 2 signs, no swimming and a laminated card with CPR steps that will be illegible by August. We don't reenact. We throw a rock or two. He tells me about his job and the dog he's finally getting. We leave before nostalgia turns the place into something it wasn't.
The story I tell on the internet usually wants a twist. This one already had 2. The neighbor who arrived in time, and the mother who said the sentence you wouldn't believe if it hadn't happened in your kitchen. The rest is quieter. I learned that a single sentence can build a cul-de-sac inside you where you loop for years unless you draw a map out. I learned that competence in emergencies is less about heroics and more about not making new victims. I learned that you can sit beside someone you will never get what you need from and still be a person you respect. If you want a practical takeaway, take this. Teach your people the water rules. If you live near even a decorative pond, show them what drowning actually looks like. Vertical, quiet, quick. Put a throw ring where a child could reach it. Label it with a marker in letters you can see from the path. Learn CPR. Practice on a piece of couch while you watch TV. The body remembers. If you want the emotional one, pay attention to the sentences you say in rooms where fear is cooking. Your voice is architecture. Children will live inside what you build. You don't have to make it a cathedral. Just don't turn it into a trap. Sometimes I imagine a version of my mother who said a different line. Not, "I'm sorry," which is Hollywood. Something practical. We're going to swim lessons. We're buying a throw rope. We're putting up a rule. The alternate timeline isn't better because it's nicer. It's better because it gives a frightened house something to do. Method is the friend of mercy. I wish I had a final scene where she and I found a perfect middle. We didn't. She grew old inside the weather she knew. I grew into someone who checks locks and tides and also leaves parties early when the air gets thick with old scripts. Eli learned to take up space without apologizing. Kellen eventually moved to Florida to be near grandkids and probably saved 2 more people in a storm, because that is the kind of man he decided to be. The pond looks the same. The fence is a bit higher. The picnic table gave up.
The cattails still call themselves forests if you are small enough. When I walk by, I feel my shoulders and the doors they became, and I thank the version of me who held a child above water badly and then learned how to do it less badly the next time. The sentence still exists. It does not run the room anymore. When it gets loud, I put on my shoes and go to the pool on volunteer night. I watch for the kid whose mouth is at the waterline and eyes are level and arms are doing nothing. I step toward them and talk the whole way. I'm here. Keep your chin up. I've got you. Breathe. It is surprising how often those are the exact words I need, too.